Hello and welcome to Beginners Python and Machine Learning. My name's Tim Cummings. Every Tuesday we look at a different topic on Python. This is really addressed to beginners, and but by bringing up different topics it just gives you an opportunity to ask questions. So if you want to ask questions tonight, feel free to do it on either the YouTube chat or also on the Slack channel, and the instructions for that are below in the comments section below this YouTube video. We're asking questions in Learning to Code, and you can even ask them after the video is finished and someone might be looking at it and will be able to help you. Alright, we're currently still doing online sessions. We haven't been able to find a good location yet for doing in-person events, and our first attempt at an in-person event since COVID, we couldn't do it. So on the 5th of July it was actually an online event as well. Okay, so tonight we're going to be looking at using the REST API that's provided by MS Graph to write a Python program that's going to upload files to OneDrive. So this can be a lot of fun. There's a lot of power you can do with REST APIs, and it gives you a really good background in how to use them. They're very common, and this is a great way to learn. Okay. So I'm on the meetup page here, but I've also put a link on the YouTube video, so that if you click on the link, you'll get from our GitHub repository, you'll get the code that we're going to use tonight. And in that code, you'll see you'll have the instructions of what we're going to do, and down below is actually the Python code that will let us run some stuff. Okay, so let's get started. What you're going to need tonight, Python 3.8 or later, and an IDE, or you can just watch along, but the best way to learning is actually doing the stuff, and that will also spark any questions that you might have. First of all, we're going to work out how to use REST APIs, and Microsoft have provided a very good tool here called this Graph Explorer. So open up a new window in your browser, and we'll go to that and try using it. Okay, so this is the Graph Explorer, and it's got a section here which is what the request is. So REST APIs, they use pretty similar to HTTP requests that we use on the web, and so they have a request that gets sent out and a response comes back from the server with the data that we need. So this tool really shows how the requests are formatted, and it gives the responses that we get. Now I'm currently logged in, so I'm just going to log out so it'll look like what it'll look like for you. Yep. Okay, so down the left hand side and getting started, the first thing you see here is get my profile. So if we click that, you can see what it does is it creates a URL up here. It's going to do an HTTP request which is called a GET, and now there's a few different ones. You have GET, POST, PUT, I don't remember what patch is, and delete. We have a version of the API that we're going to use. We're going to be using version 1, and because it's a GET request, it doesn't have any request body, doesn't have any request headers. It tells you what permissions you'll need, but we'll work on them later, and how you'd use access tokens for doing authentication. Alright, so they've given us an example of what it looks like. If we send this request in, you should all have got this as just some sample data giving what the response will be look like, and you can see it's a JSON object, which is common in web technologies. And we can easily convert that into Python data for us. Comes back with some headers. Wow, they even tell us some code snippets of how we can do this in C#, JavaScript, Java. They haven't given us Python, so we'll ignore that for now. Alright, so now let's try the same thing again, and this time we'll log in. So up in the top right hand corner, try logging in with your Microsoft account. Okay, so now we're logged in. We'll run the same same one. I think we can just click on Run Query up here because it's all set up. And there we go. You can see my name's come back, D. Tim Cummings, and it's got my email address there under user principal name, and not much other information. So we got that just by sending this URL off to the Microsoft server, and it returned this data for us. So now the challenge is, how do we use this in our programs? So let's start. We'll move this to a new window. Of that on the left. There we go. All right, so I've done the first one. Getting started, we did get my profile, and now let's getting started, get all the items in my OneDrive. So in my drive, that's this one here. So you can see here it's changed the URL here, posted it, and then we've got this data that's come back. And what's it telling us? It's telling us there's a OneDrive, and down here is going to be something useful, I hope. So I'm looking for the names here. So there's a folder called Pictures. So what was that? That's in name. Alright. There's a folder called Documents. And there's probably one called Desktop. So there we go. So we found that there's 3 folders in my OneDrive. And now I might log into OneDrive just to see if that's correct. Now I could do this in File Explorer. And there we go, Desktop, Documents and Pictures. I've got one Personal Vault. I'm not sure if that will come up. Oh, and there's one Getting Started with OneDrive. Now this gives me a direct access to what's on the server. I could show you what's in File Explorer, but that requires a bit of synchronization time. So probably tonight I'll spend most of my time looking in the web version so I can see that directly. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one. We want to try to create a new folder in our OneDrive. So we can look in here, down here, there's all these different services that Microsoft offer that all connect through the REST API, so it's quite powerful. And we'll go to the one that says OneDrive, and there's the one, create a folder. Now you have to be logged in to use this. So if I click on it, it'll create a folder here, and let's call it from Graph Explorer. Okay, and then we'll run that. And now if we look in our files here, and let's refresh this. Can't see a refresh. Let's look at the response that came back. It's got the name, new file from Graph Explorer. So it looks like a positive response there, came back. And here you can see we've got a request body, which we didn't have before, and that's because this is a post. So to explain the first two, get is like you've just got a URL, which is you'd have straight in an address bar. So it's quite easy to simulate get requests by just typing the URL into the address bar of your browser, although with authentication you have to get your headers and your cookies right. A post will have a body section, and this tool here has done a very good job of providing us a way of editing the body. It's in a JSON format, and we can set what the name is. I don't know what folder means, but it'll just create a new folder, and it'll do it in this folder here. So this is the tells us where we're doing it. We're putting in the root. So let's go back and have a look, see if it's there yet. Not yet. Well, there you go. I said that I thought the web would be faster than our File Explorer, but here it is. It's here in File Explorer, a new folder from Graph Explorer. That's what we just created at 5:40 p.m. Okay. So the next one, demonstrate modify and create a folder to create a folder called BPAML148. Well, I just showed you how to modify that. I changed the name to new folder from Graph Explorer. So give that a go. See how you go with that. And I'll move on to task 2. Use the API menu in Graph Explorer to look up the API for creating a folder in OneDrive. Okay, so this has demonstrated how to do it, but we want to read the API documentation. And here in this menu, it'll tell us. So they've got a reference here. I'm going to open that in a new tab. I just like to show you where you can get this information, because when you're trying to do something slightly different, you need to have the documentation. Okay. So this site here gives us documentation, API reference, and we are looking for stuff to do with OneDrive, which will be in the files section, and drive items, and create folder. So what does it tell us? It tells us we need permissions, and we're going to be using delegated permissions tonight because we're just a single person, so we don't have we haven't got the access into Azure Active Directory that would be required to set up application type permissions. So we'll just use delegated type permissions, and that Graph Explorer handles a lot of that for us, but when we run it in Python, you'll see what we have to do to get that. Now there's quite a few different URLs that will all work to create a new folder in a drive. It says that there's got to be a post. It says this is what it's going to look like, and this is the one that we used. So me just says the logged in user has a drive, and in there it's got items. You have to say which item we're going to be, and so we didn't even use exactly this format. So these are just the main formats, and even amongst them there's variations. The one that we used was me/drive/root, and they just took us straight to the root folder, so we didn't need to say parent item ID. We just said root there, and then children, and so in children it's that's all the URL has to be, and it knows that if it gets this request body with a post, then what it's doing is creating a new folder. Okay, the request body, it says what's needed. It has to be JSON representation, and it gives us some examples here. So we could have actually added this extra field, what the conflict behavior is going to be. So if there was already a folder with that name, if we put this in here, it'd just add a 1 or something to it, so that there was no clash. And this is what a successful response. This is your headers and the response. So let's have a look at our response. Our response headers, we've got the content type was JSON, and the response, where's it give the response code? Oh, 201, there we go, there's the response code, 201. And so that's a success code. So 404, if you know, is the file not found response code, and there's a bunch of others. Okay, task 2. Try changing the folder name. Oh yeah, we've done that. Oh, try changing the folder name. Oh, we won't bother about changing an existing folder name at this stage. We'll go straight into task 3, but if you want to have a go at that, certainly have a feel free. So task 3, create a Python program that implements the Graph API calls. Okay, so in Graph Explorer, in this API menu, there's a quick start. So if you click on that, I'll open that in a new tab. They'll give you some code. So that's really useful, and even Python's in the list. So we're going to have some Python code. We have to create an ID so that we can get the security permissions from Microsoft to do this. So once again, we have to log in. So you log in with your Microsoft account, don't log in with mine, because you'll be wanting to do this to your own OneDrive and on your own computer. Okay, so it's registered the program with the name Graph Python Quick Start, and it's given it a client ID, and it's actually grabbed that client ID and stuck it into some code for us. So I'm not like I'm used to having to copy and paste this into code, but Microsoft's done that for us, and it's in this download the code sample. So let's download it, and here it is. So I'll grab that code and let's throw it into the Pycharm projects. So I'm going to create a new folder in here. For tonight's session. I'll paste in what we've got, and let's unzip that. I've got 7-zip here, so extract here, and that's given us a few files here with the readme, and the code is really this folder here, graph tutorial. Okay, so now I'll run Pycharm Community Edition. And we'll open up that project. So there it is, BPML 148. And we can trust this project. I can tell you that it's trustworthy. It's come from Microsoft, so that's reasonably good. Okay. Now there's a couple of things we need to do to make it fit into the format that Pycharm works well with. So I've put down these things. So we open in Pycharm, and now the first thing to do is create a virtual environment. Now we could do this from the command line, but I might show you the way to do it in Pycharm. So we'll go to the settings menu, and we go down to our project and select the interpreter that's currently being used. And you see here it's just grabbed my locally installed Python. But if I install any packages in there, then every other project that uses this Python on this computer will see those extra packages. So I want to isolate the packages to just this project, so that because when you have extra packages installed, extra third-party packages, you can get difficult to debug problems due to the interaction of the different packages. Alright, so we click on this and say show me all the Python interpreters available, and we'll just create a brand new one. So I'll click on the plus. So if I go too fast, just let me know, and I can go through this again. So it's going to create one in a folder called VENV, which is in our project folder, BPAML148, and it's going to be based on that installed Python. I've got Python 3.10, and I'm using a virtual environment. If you're using Anaconda, you'll have to switch that to Conda environment, and then these other ones you can use, but this is the one I'd recommend. So that's created one, and it's going to call it BPAML148. So now we're using it. It's even added an extra package for us, the wheel package, which will be useful. Okay. Now the other thing we need to do, remember how all the code was actually in graph tutorial, including the requirements.txt. So we can tell Pycharm what that structure is. So we go to the project structure here for our project, and we say no, this is not correct, so we'll just delete this one, remove that content root, and we'll add where the new content root is, which is graph tutorial. Okay, and we click on OK. So now it's put graph tutorial up here at the top, and it's in graph tutorial of 4 files. We've got our config.cfg, and there's our client ID that we created earlier, so yours will be different to mine. It's got a file here that's doing all the work. We've got a file here that's the main program, that's the one we're going to run, and we've got a file requirements.txt. So requirements.txt is a really convenient way of listing all the third-party libraries that you need, and Pycharm can easily install all those. In fact, it's saying, do you want to install them right now? So I could just click on install requirements. It says, what do I want? I'll grab all of them, and so it's just going to install all those libraries in our virtual environment. And so if you're writing your own code to use MS Graph, then you could probably use these same set of libraries. Alright, I can ignore the extension for now. Now there's one more file that we need for our code tonight. We're going to be creating some PDFs online. Online. So that's going to use the Report Lab third-party library. So if I save that, it's still, if you look down the bottom here, it's still installing those other ones, but when it gets to the finisher, then I'll ask if we want to install Report Lab. Okay. Alright, I'll wait till that's all done. So it's installing now. URL lib. Okay, so they've all installed successfully. And it's just indexing at the moment. And now it's worked out that we've put Report Lab in there as well, so we'll install that one as well. That should be pretty quick. Okay. So we want to run the code now. So if we go into main.py, and then if I'm on Windows at the moment, so it's just Control-Shift-F10, and this will run the code. So to sign in, use a web browser to open the page and enter the code. Now you'll have a different code there when you're running it on your computer. So I'm just going to copy that code. It changes every time. And I'm going to log into this URL, and it's asking me for the code. So I'll put the code in there, paste that in. And now I'm going to get really good at logging into my Microsoft account. Now it's worked out that this program wants to do things like read your emails, send emails as you, maintain access to data and that. So what we're doing here is we're approving this application that we've written in Python, or Microsoft have given it to us that's written in Python, to do all this stuff. So we'll say yes. Okay, so now we can close that, and we'll go back to our Pycharm and see what we get. So here we go, it's running down here in our run window, and it's signed in. It's worked out that it's me who typed in my username and password after I typed in that code. It tells me what my email is, and now saying what would we like to do. So let's try display access token. So I type 1 and press enter, and there's my access token. So that's got that through that authentication procedure that we've just done in our web browser. List my inbox. I don't think I've got much in this inbox, but let's have a look. Yeah, so it's got a few. There we go. A new sign-ins detected from this account, all this signing in I've been doing. So let's go and have a look at my actual email and see what see if that's correct. I mean, there you go, new sign-in detected, new apps detected. So yes, they're all the emails that are currently sitting in my inbox, and the program was able to work them out. Okay, so let's try number 3, sending an email. Okay, we'll go back to my email and have a look. There we go. It's just sent this one called Hello World at 17:58. And have a look at my inbox. Here it is. It's come in. So I just sent it to myself, and that was done through Python. Okay. Let me know if you're having success running these examples. Alright, so the next thing, we're going to use Pycharm Debugger to analyze the program flow to see how it's doing all this stuff. We're going to debug it step through one at a time. So let's have a look. So first of all, I'm going to quit out of here, so that's 0 as exit. And in main.py, we've got a definition of a main function. So that defines it. There's a couple of other things here that get defined. All these functions are getting defined. And then right at the end is where the function, that's the only line that actually gets run, which is calling the function main. Okay, so I'm going to set a debugger statement on that. And so that when that runs, it gets to there, we're going to see, and we can step through the code and see how it works. Alright, so I'll make this a bit bigger. Now here's main up here. Remember we did Control-Shift-F10 before to run it. Now that we've run it once, it remembers that run configuration, and now gives us the option to run it or debug it. So let's try debugging. So it's running now in the debugger, and it's come to this step, this point here, where we've set the breakpoint on the last line. And now we've got an option we can jump in to. So I like step into my code, Alt-Shift F7. So I'll click onto that, and it starts running the function that's called main. So I'll jump over that step, print Python graph tutorial, and if I look in the console, you'll see Python graph tutorial has just been printed. So I'll go back to debugger now. Config equals config parser.config parser. Okay. So now I can see what's gone into config, and it's nothing yet, hasn't read the file. So let's read that file, and then the Azure settings are going to be config / key Azure. And that's in there somewhere. Let's just look at it once it gets assigned to Azure settings. And here it is. We've got okay, so that's so now we're going to initialize the graph using this section proxy. So initialize graph, that's still in main.py, but it's calling graph.initialize graph for user auth with settings. So I'll step into my code again, and it's got this config, which we can't still really view in the debugger that easily, but once we look at these, we should be able to see it. So client ID, it's got the client ID out of the config file. Tenant ID, it's got out, but it just says the word common. And graph scopes. So there's the securities that we're asking for when we do our login. User read, mail send. And now we're going to call graph client. So I'm going to jump into that. And that's in _graph client, and you'll see the path to that one is actually one of the third-party libraries that we installed called msgraph. So that's useful just to see what it's doing. And it's just going to create a new class there. I'll step over that, and we'll just keep stepping over these. And now we've initialized the graph. Now we can do greet user. So let's jump into greet user and see what it does. So it calls graph and says get the user. Okay, now you can see it's gone off and is doing something else. And what it's done is it's printed on the console here to sign in and use the web browser. So this is our familiar one we did before. Same, asking for the same permissions, and it's in. We can hide the window now, and now our debugger's returned to here, so we can step over that line. It says print hello to our name, so hopefully you got your name when you ran that code, and it's going to print the email address. Okay, yep, there's the email address. So it's good looking at this open source code and just sort of see how other people write their code as well. Choice equals -1, and now it gives a whole bunch of options and waits till we type something in. So I'm just going to set a breakpoint there and type run, so I don't have to step through each one individually. And there we go, it's printed all of those, and we can do whichever one of those that we want to. So what do we do now? Let's try step through, see where it goes. All right. Oh yeah, I mean, we'll do one of the calls. So let's do the send email one. So now it's waiting. So I'll type 3. And it's going to check our choice. 1, 2, 3, send mail. So let's see how it does a send mail. It gets the user, which it's already got because we've already authenticated. It's working out the user name is going to be either user mail or user principal name, and we can look over here and see what's in user, and user mail is none, so that'll be false. So then it'll look at this one, user principal name, and that's where it's got my email address. Okay, so send a mail. So let's have a look at how it does that. It creates a dictionary with all the bits that it needs for the Graph API, and puts that into a variable called request body. Creates a request URL, and I'll show you how to get those URLs from the API. And then it does this user client post, and this I'll just show you, like, you don't have to understand everything that's going on here, but when I looked in, I'm going to press out because I didn't want to go into that one. So that was json.dumps. Headers, and now it's going to actually call user client.post. So I want to go inside, see how it does it, and it calls self.graphsession.post. So let's see, I think that'll first take me into graph URL, which it is. So it's worked out how to get the graph URL that it's going to use, and really it's just, we've got the URL and it's just deciding whether it's going to put in the base part of the URL at the beginning. So I mean, these third-party libraries, they hardly do anything. They just confuse things by having it there. But anyway, that's what we've got. And we'll go in and now do the post. And the post is just doing self.request. So let's go and see what self.request is. And self.request, it creates a request. I'm going to make this a bit bigger with all of this stuff in it, and sends it. Okay, so let's see what request is. It's going to be imported. Here it's imported from models. Okay, so it's still part of the but it's in sessions, and sessions is part of the third-party library called requests. So this is a good library to use, because this is a fairly standard third-party library. There's lots of documentation on requests, but look, we can call requests itself. We don't need a Microsoft library to be calling that. But one thing, having looked through that, I saw that it had this sessions thing, and sessions is a way of remembering the cookies. So I didn't realize that requests could do that. So I learned something by going through the code to see how Microsoft were doing it. But if you don't need to use request sessions, you can even just remember the cookies yourself and make sure you send them each time in the headers. Okay, I've seen enough. I can just step out of these functions, and it'll just take me back to my code. So we're in send mail. I'm going to step out of that one, so it'll finish it and then return, and finish that one and return, and it's waiting for another choice. So let's have a look. Yeah, so mail sent, and it printed up the list again. Okay, so let's just, we'll run that and press 0 to exit. Alright, now we're going to get to do a little bit of coding ourselves soon, and if you look in graph.py, this make a graph call, it calls this thing make graph call, and that's in graph.py, and it's the very last one, make graph call, and this is where we can put our code. So that's what we're going to work on next. Okay, so how are we going to do that? So this file that we've got here, we're looking at from GitHub. This is the one I wrote before, and we're going to save that as a file straight into the program. So we'll go, I'm in Google Chrome, so I'll go save page as. I'll choose where I want to save it. I'll save it in BPM or graph tutorial, and just leave it with the same name, and it's a Python file. You might get a warning saying you want to save a program to your computer. Just say yes. It should be safe, especially as you can see the code, so you know what it's doing. So we've added it in, and now we need to add this line into graph.py so we can use our code. So I'll copy that from there, and I'll go into graph.py. You can see our program's come up here. It's got a very long name, but we can import it with an alias so that it's not so hard to use. So if I paste that, so I'm importing this very long named module and giving it a short alias name BPAML148, and then I can call any of the routines that I've got in here, and let's have a look at what's in here. Well, you know what's in here, it's over here. We've got one here, list drive items, create folder in OneDrive, and fetch documents ID, create folder in documents, put PDF in documents. Okay, so this stuff's quite in depth, so I thought maybe I'll do a demonstration first. I'll demonstrate what we're trying to do. So we've got that, and then we can go back. So but even to the demonstration, first of all we need to expand our permissions that we require. The permissions that were set up before were for setting the email and looking at email inbox. Now we're going to do stuff to OneDrive, so we need to use files.readWrite as our permission. And remember, back in Graph Explorer, that showed you what permissions were required for each of the different calls that you're going to do. So you can always refer back to that or look at the API reference. So this goes into our list of graph user scopes that we need. So I'll put it there, files.readWrite. And we're going to, let's do the last one so I can say that we've done what the title said for tonight's session. We'll put a PDF in the documents folder, and it's going to, so we're going to create a PDF. So once we've done this, we'll go back and have a look through the code and see how it all works. So that goes in graph. So just before the return. Okay. So let's run it. We don't need the debugger anymore, so I'll run it. I'll just use the normal runner. We'll get our code that's going to be required for authentication. We'll log in. So if you're doing an application for a company that's got Azure Active Directory, there are different ways of doing this authentication, so you don't have to do it every time you run the program. But this is actually quite a secure way of doing it for programs that you want to give to someone that only works for their own stuff, is that they then have to authenticate when they run the program, and they authenticate through a web browser, so to get the access tokens. Okay, let this app access your info, and now it's asking for accessing OneDrive files, so that's an extra thing that we didn't have from before, so I'll say yes to that. All done. You can now close this window, and now we can select option 5, which is make a graph call. And that's put a few bit of output here. So it's looked through the folders that are there. It's found the one called documents. It's found the ID for that folder, and it's then used that ID in the request to upload a file. So we've created a PDF file on the fly, and then we've uploaded it as binary bytes up to the OneDrive server, and so now we should be able to see it. So let's have a look. Yep. So here's my OneDrive. I've got a documents folder, and in there is PDF banner BPML 148. If I open that in Adobe, you'll see this is the one we created. It's got the current date and time, so 12th of July, 6:15 p.m. and beginners Python. So I just created a bit of ASCII art there to put the to show that we've just created this on the fly. So it's not a document that existed beforehand. We've created the document and uploaded it straight to OneDrive. And if we look in our, let's have a look in our web browser and see if it's up there. Go into documents. There it is there. And they've even given us a preview of it, showing the ASCII art and the date and time. Alright, so I'll close that. I'm not sure why that's not showing the new folder we created before, but that folder did show up in File Explorer, so I'm happy with that. Now to refresh that page. There it is, new folder from Graph Explorer. That's the one we created. Okay, let's go back to our code. So which bits, let me know which bits you think are the most interesting that you're trying to achieve by using this Graph API. But I'll go through all the different steps that we've just done now. Okay, so I've got one called list drive items. So let's have a look at that. And it's in here. I can look at the structure and find list drive items, close structure. So I've got a request URL. So that's I got from the Graph Explorer, and then I send that request URL to user client, and I use the get method. So remember, there were the 4 methods that we're going to use: get, post, put, and delete. And for this one, to list drive items, we saw before on Graph Explorer we needed to use the get method. So we use get there, and we provide the URL, and it's going to return the value that it returns can be interpreted as JSON. So we get the JSON value of the response, and we can treat that pretty much like a dictionary, and we can get the value out of that, and then we just iterate through the value, each of the items in there, and look at its ID and its name. So let's see how that works by using this function here. Okay. So we'll stop the program that's current. Oh, I could press. It's better actually press 0 to exit, and then I have to start it up again because I've had a code change. This time it's asking me for everything, so obviously permissions have expired on the other things that we approved before. Okay. So now we've authenticated, it's worked out who I am, it's given us a list, and we put everything under number 5, make a graph call. And so it's listed all the documents that it found in that root folder and the IDs that are available for each one. So now we know these IDs, we could use them if we wanted to find out what the contents of any one of those folders were. And in fact, that's what we did. We found the documents ID when we created that PDF, and then put the use that documents ID in the URL to say we're creating a file in that folder. Okay. The next task 6, add the scope. We've already done that. Let's try creating a folder in OneDrive. Okay. So create a folder in OneDrive. This one uses post. So the last one used get. So gets are very easy. Post is a bit harder. First of all, we need to have the URL that we're going to post to, and that's that we've worked out from the Graph API. Then we need the data, and so we get that. We create a dictionary that has all the data, because dictionaries are very similar to JSON objects, and in this case I've put in the conflict behavior rename, and then we use the JSON library to convert that to a string and provide that to our data element when we do the post. And then we also supply the headers, and the headers that we need to supply is that the content type is JSON, application/JSON. So we're writing the data as JSON, and we tell it that the content type is JSON, so that it knows that. And then that we call post, and post calls request.sessions, and because request.sessions remembers the cookies, we don't have to put in a header there for authentication. But if you're not using request.sessions, then at this stage you'd probably also need to provide the headers for the authentication cookies. Alright, let's try running that. So we need to go to graph, and we're going to do create folder, in OneDrive. Okay. So let's see what would happen. I'm not restarting at this stage. If I do make a graph call, it still replied to the same stuff as before. So I'm going to exit and run it. Enter the code. So next week, let me know if you want me, next month, I can do a continuation of this, go through in a bit more detail how to send these calls. So let me know if that would be of interest to you, and which particular things you'd like to know. You can even do it later on during the month, have a go at doing some of these yourself and see how they work. Like, I'll probably give you a bit of a rundown on how to do the Azure Active Directory permissions, so you don't have to keep doing this sort of authentication every time. But you really need to have I think you'll need to have a paid account to be able to, for Microsoft 365, if you want to be able to do that. Alright. So we had a look at what the code did for create folder in OneDrive. So let's press number 5 again. And there's the response that we've got back. And what's it supposed to do? It's creating a folder called BPAML148 in root. So let's have a look at our web view. I'm going to use the refresh button here. That's the one I needed to press before, and there it is, BPAML148 in root, created less than a minute ago. Okay, find the ID of the documents folder. So I showed you all the IDs popping up before. We can here's a bit of code that just searches through them until it finds the one with documents, and if it finds it, then it breaks out and returns that ID and saves it. It's a global variable, that one. So this time we got a request URL, and we use the get to get the list of all the children from root and find the one that's got a name that matches documents, and from that we get the ID. Okay. So it's running. Sign in. So I'd be interested to know if you let me know that you had success in getting these creating these folders, or finding the documents ID, or even creating the PDF. If that worked on your computer, let me know. Okay. We've connected. I'll press make a graph call, and it returns documents ID equals that. And you can see from the list here that that is in fact correct. Alright, and the last one was task 8, which is put the PDF in the documents. We haven't had a look at that code yet, so let's have a look at that code to see how it worked. But we've already run it, so we don't need to run it again. Even if there's something in Pycharm you don't understand how I'm doing it, I might be clicking on something, just let me know, and I can run you through how to use that part of Pycharm. Alright, so we're creating a PDF here. If you want details on how to do that, see Meetup 66. We did a session on using Report Lab for creating our own PDFs dynamically, which is a really useful thing in a business environment. We needed to use Report Lab as a third-party library to do that, so you have to add Report Lab to requirements.txt and install it in the virtual environment, or you can even use pip install Report Lab to do that. Alright, so this one we're just creating a simple doc template into a buffer. So our buffer is, we're using the IO library, and we're just creating a buffer of bytes, so we use bytes IO. So normally Report Lab is designed to create these PDFs straight to files, but we don't want to create a file on our computer. We want to create the file on the OneDrive server, so we save it as bytes in our computer, by using this PDF buffer as the file name, as the file, and everything gets saved into that. And then at the end, once we've built this PDF, we can get all the bytes straight out of the PDF buffer by using get value, and then those bytes we can send them as data into in our put command, and at that stage we can just use a content type application PDF rather than application JSON, which we did last time, and it's all in binary, and with a put it can have this extra data that can be sent as binary along with our request URL, which is saying where we want it to go, which is into the documents ID with a file name that we've created called PDF banner bbaml148.pdf, and with its content. And the content you can see here is just this ASCII art, which I've done using pre-formatted, and I created a paragraph with today's date and time so that we could see it was a fresh file that had just been created. Okay, well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Press like on the video if you thought that was worthwhile, and I hope you learned something from it all. I learned something putting this together. In fact, that's what I had to do this for a client. I had to do some work on their OneDrive and SharePoint, and so I had to work out how to use these REST APIs. So I thought I'd share the knowledge that I gained with you, so I hope that you've learned something. So now the next few weeks are going to be all machine learning with Arun. He's going to be doing even the absolute beginners session on the first Tuesday of August, and then I'll be back on the second Tuesday of August with probably a follow-up on some extra things that you can learn about using the Graph API and extra things that you can do with it. Okay, bye.